Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because at 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you.
The metallic clang of the cell door reverberated through the dimly lit chamber, accompanied by the guttural laughter of the Zereth guards. Captain Michael Cale didn't flinch. Years on the front lines had taught him not to show weakness, especially not in the face of enemies who thrived on it. He remained standing, his wrists raw from the bindings that had been roughly removed before he was shoved inside. The guards, towering insectoid beings with jagged chitinous exoskeletons, exchanged mocking glances. One of them chittered in their native tongue, its mandibles clicking with amusement before addressing Michael in broken galactic common. "Human. You die soon." Michael tilted his head slightly, his expression blank. He'd heard worse threats. Without another word, the guard slammed the heavy cell door shut. The dull hum of an energy field buzzed as the locks engaged, sealing him inside. For a few moments, the only sound was the faint echo of the guard's retreating footsteps. Michael exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold, stale air. The cell was cavernous, its walls scorched and claw-marked, as though something had tried to tear its way out. The faint metallic tang of blood lingered, sharp and unignorable. Michael's sharp eyes scanned the chamber, cataloging every detail, every corner, every dent, every potential tool or weapon. Then he heard it, a low resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. He turned his head slowly, his body tensing as the sound grew louder. From the darkness in the farthest corner of the cell, two glowing golden eyes appeared, cutting through the gloom like twin embers. The creature stepped into the dim light, and Michael's jaw tightened. It was massive, easily 4 times his size, with sleek obsidian-like scales that shimmered faintly under the dim overhead lamp. Its wings, folded tightly against its sides, gave it an imposing silhouette, and its talons clicked ominously against the metal floor with each step. A long, sinuous tail swayed behind it, the tip razor-sharp. A Chrysler. Michael had heard stories of them, genetically engineered beasts bred by the Zereth for destruction. On the battlefield, a single Chrysler could decimate entire platoons, its raw power and cunning making it a living nightmare. Few survived encounters with one, and those who did rarely spoke of it. "Of course," Michael muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "Why not throw me in with their deadliest weapon?" The Chrysler's nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, its glowing eyes locked on him. Its lips curled back, revealing rows of serrated teeth as it let out a guttural snarl that sent a shiver down Michael's spine. He took a slow step back, his mind racing. He was unarmed, unarmored, and cornered in a cell designed to contain this monster. Running wasn't an option, neither was fighting. Not with his bare hands. But Michael wasn't a soldier for nothing. His mind sharpened, drawing on every lesson, every experience he'd endured during years of war. He didn't need strength to survive this, he needed strategy. The Chrysler growled again, stepping closer. Its movements were fluid, but slightly uneven. Michael's sharp gaze caught the faintest drag in its left side, the subtle tremor of its wing as it shifted. His instincts kicked in immediately. The beast was injured. "Yeah," Michael muttered under his breath. "You're not at 100%, are you?" The Chrysler halted, its head tilting slightly as if it understood him. Michael held his ground, his posture loose but ready to react if it decided to lunge. His eyes met the creature's glowing gaze, and he kept his tone calm, measured. "I don't want to hurt you," he said quietly, knowing the absurdity of his words. "Not that I could if I tried. But you're not looking so good. They've been using you, haven't they? Throwing you into fights, letting you take the hits." The Chrysler let out a low huff, its breath warm and rank. It took another step closer, its massive claws clicking against the floor. Michael could feel the heat radiating from its body, the sheer power coiled within its frame. He kept his hands at his sides, palms open and visible. "I've patched up worse than you. Let me help." The creature growled, a deep rumble that resonated through the chamber. It was a warning, but not an outright rejection. Michael took a slow breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "Look," he said, crouching slightly to make himself seem less threatening. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I've been on the other side of this cell before. I know what it's like to be treated like a tool, like a weapon. You're more than that." The Chrysler hesitated, its golden eyes narrowing. For a long tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, with surprising delicacy, it lowered itself slightly, exposing the joint where its wing met its massive shoulder. Michael could see the wound more clearly now, a deep gash running along the scales, oozing dark fluid. The edges were inflamed, the telltale signs of infection creeping into the tissue. Michael blinked, caught off guard by the creature's gesture. "You're letting me?" He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. There was no time to waste. He approached slowly, inching closer until he was within reach of the injury. The Chrysler rumbled, but didn't lash out. Michael tore a strip from his shirt, improvising a makeshift bandage. "This isn't going to be pretty," he warned, reaching out to clean the wound with what little he had. The Chrysler flinched as he worked, a sharp growl rumbling in its chest, but it didn't attack. Michael's hands moved with practiced precision, his years as a field medic guiding him. He cleaned the wound as best he could, binding it tightly with the fabric. "There," he said after a few tense minutes. "Not perfect, but it'll hold for now." The Chrysler let out a low rumble, its body relaxing slightly. Michael stepped back, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't know what kind of bond he'd just formed with the creature, but it was enough to keep him alive, for now. "Guess we're in this together," he muttered, leaning back against the wall. The Chrysler huffed softly, its glowing eyes watching him with what he could almost describe as curiosity. Whatever came next, Michael knew one thing for sure: the Zirith had underestimated him. And by the look of the Chrysler, they had underestimated it too. Hours passed in a tense, uneasy quiet. The Chrysler remained near the far side of the cell, coiled but alert, its golden eyes never leaving Michael. He leaned against the cold metal wall, trying to piece together a plan. His makeshift treatment of the Chrysler's wound had bought him time, maybe even a fragile truce, but he knew it wasn't enough. The cell was a dead end, a tomb waiting to close in. The reinforced walls, claw-marked but unyielding, offered no hope of escape. The only exit was the door, sealed with an energy field and guarded by the Zirith. And then there was the Chrysler, a creature bred for war, intelligent but still unpredictable. Michael studied the beast again. Its breathing had steadied, and it shifted its weight carefully, testing its injured wing. The makeshift bandage seemed to be holding, though the infection hadn't been fully dealt with. The Chrysler huffed softly, its nostrils flaring as it turned its head toward him. "All right, big guy," Michael murmured, his voice low and calm. "If we're going to survive this, we're going to need a way out." The Chrysler tilted its head slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it understood. Michael knew it was unlikely, but there was something in the creature's gaze that felt aware. He'd seen that look before, in soldiers who had been through hell and lived to tell the tale. The Chrysler wasn't just a beast, it was a survivor. Michael pushed himself to his feet, his legs stiff from sitting too long. He began pacing the cell, studying every crack, every scorch mark, every detail that could offer an advantage. His eyes fell on the remnants of the bindings the Zirith guards had cut off him. Thin, metallic cords lay discarded on the floor, their sharp edges gleaming faintly in the dim light. "Not much," Michael muttered to himself, picking them up, "but it's a start." The Chrysler rumbled softly, shifting its massive frame. Michael glanced at it, holding up the cords. "You've got claws and teeth. I've got this. Not exactly an even playing field, huh?" The Chrysler huffed again, the sound almost like a snort of amusement. Michael smirked despite himself. "Yeah, laugh it up. Let's see how funny this is when those guards come back." He returned to the door, studying the control panel embedded beside it. Alien symbols glowed faintly, and a shimmering barrier of energy buzzed across the frame. Michael's fingers brushed the cords as he calculated the odds. The Chrysler watched him closely, its tail swaying slowly behind it. "If I can short this out," Michael said, more to himself than the Chrysler, "it might drop the field. Of course, that'll bring the guards running." He glanced back at the creature. "That's where you come in." The Chrysler growled low, its wings twitching slightly. Michael took that as a tentative agreement. He crouched beside the panel, using one of the sharp cords to pry open the casing. Sparks crackled as he exposed the inner circuitry, a mess of glowing wires and alien tech. "Don't suppose you know how to hack a Zirith energy field?" Michael muttered, glancing at the Chrysler. The beast blinked slowly, offering no answer. "Didn't think so." He worked quickly, his fingers deftly manipulating the cords to create a crude bypass. The panel emitted a sharp beep, and the energy field flickered for a moment before stabilizing again. Michael cursed under his breath. The Chrysler rose to its feet, its massive frame looming over him. It stepped closer, its claws clicking against the floor. Michael tensed, but the creature didn't attack. Instead, it lowered its head, its sharp talons tapping lightly on the edge of the panel. Michael stared at it, realization dawning. "You're helping me?" The Chrysler let out a low rumble, its glowing eyes focused on the panel. With surprising precision, it used one of its claws to slice through a thick wire inside the casing. Sparks flew, and the energy field flickered again. This time, it vanished entirely. Michael stood slowly, staring at the now open door. "Well, I'll be damned. You're smarter than you look." The Chrysler growled softly, its tail lashing as it stepped back from the panel. Michael took a deep breath, gripping the metallic cord tightly. All right. No turning back now. Together, they stepped into the corridor beyond the cell. The dimly lit hall stretched in both directions, the distant hum of machinery filling the silence. Michael crouched low, scanning for signs of movement. The Chrysler stayed close, its massive body casting a long shadow on the walls. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing faintly. As they approached a corner, Michael held up a hand, signaling the Chrysler to stop. He peeked around the edge, spotting two Zereth guards standing near a junction. Their chitinous forms glinted under the overhead lights, and they held plasma rifles loosely in their clawed hands. Michael turned back to the Chrysler, his voice barely above a whisper. "Two of them. Armed. We need to be fast." The Chrysler rumbled in response, its claws flexing. Michael took a steadying breath, gripping the metallic cord like a garrote. "Let's see what you've got." With a flick of its tail, the Chrysler surged forward, silent and deadly. Michael followed close behind, his heart pounding. The first guard didn't even have time to raise its weapon before the Chrysler's talons tore through its chest. The second guard turned, but Michael was already there, wrapping the cord around its throat and yanking hard. The guard collapsed, its weapon clattering to the floor. Michael picked up the plasma rifle, its weight familiar in his hands. He glanced at the Chrysler, its golden eyes gleaming as it stood over the fallen guards. For the first time, Michael felt a flicker of hope. "We might just make it out of here," he said, gripping the rifle tightly. The Chrysler growled in agreement, its wings twitching as it turned toward the next corridor. Together, they disappeared into the shadows, their unlikely alliance growing stronger with each step. The corridor stretched out before them, dimly lit and eerily quiet. Michael gripped the plasma rifle tightly, his senses on high alert. Beside him, the Chrysler prowled silently, its massive frame casting long shifting shadows on the walls. The beast moved with a grace that seemed impossible for its size, every step deliberate, every motion controlled. Its glowing golden eyes flicked back and forth, scanning for threats as they advanced. Michael felt the sweat on his brow as he tried to map out the prison in his mind. He had only caught glimpses of the layout during his transfer to the cell, but those fragments of memory might be the difference between freedom and recapture. "We need a way to the upper levels," Michael muttered under his breath, glancing at the Chrysler. "That's where they'll keep the transport bays." The Chrysler didn't respond, but it let out a low rumble that echoed faintly in the corridor. Michael had no idea if the creature understood him, but it had followed his lead so far. He wasn't about to question the arrangement. They moved carefully, the muffled hum of machinery and distant clatter of guards the only sounds. Every step felt like a gamble, but the Chrysler's presence was an odd comfort. It wasn't just raw power, it was a force that unsettled even Michael. The Zereth had underestimated what they had created, and Michael intended to use that oversight to his advantage. As they turned a corner, Michael froze, motioning for the Chrysler to stop. Ahead, the corridor opened into a large chamber. Massive consoles lined the walls, their alien interfaces glowing faintly. A group of Zereth guards stood at the center, talking in sharp, guttural tones. Michael ducked back into the shadows, pressing his back against the wall. He counted 4 guards, each armed with plasma rifles. The Chrysler crouched low beside him, its tail flicking silently. Its glowing eyes locked on Michael, waiting. Michael took a slow breath, his mind racing. A direct assault wasn't ideal, but sneaking past was impossible with the Chrysler in tow. They needed to move quickly before reinforcements arrived. He glanced at the creature, its razor-sharp talons glinting faintly in the dim light. "All right, big guy," Michael whispered, a plan forming in his head. "I'll distract them. You do what you do best." The Chrysler rumbled softly, its wings twitching in what Michael hoped was agreement. He stepped into the open, raising the plasma rifle and firing a quick burst toward the nearest console. Sparks erupted as the bolts struck, and the guards spun around, their mandibles clicking in alarm. Over here. Michael shouted, his voice echoing in the chamber. He ducked behind a nearby console, drawing the guard's attention. The Chrysler moved like lightning. Before the first guard could react, it was on them, its massive claws tearing through armor and flesh with terrifying ease. The remaining guards shouted in panic, raising their weapons, but Michael fired another burst, forcing them to take cover. One of the guards tried to flank him, but the Chrysler was faster. It leapt, its powerful wings snapping open for balance as it brought the guard down with a single strike. Michael took out another with a well-placed shot, the plasma bolt searing through the Ziritha's chest. The last guard hesitated, its compound eyes darting between Michael and the Chrysler. It dropped its weapon and turned to run, but the Chrysler's tail lashed out, striking with bone-crushing force. The guard crumpled to the floor, motionless. Michael lowered the rifle, his chest heaving. The chamber was silent except for the faint crackle of damaged equipment and the Chrysler's deep, steady breathing. It stood amidst the carnage, its scales gleaming faintly under the console lights. "Remind me not to get on your bad side," Michael muttered, stepping forward. The Chrysler turned its head toward him, its glowing eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was an understanding, unspoken but clear. Michael moved to one of the consoles, scanning the alien glyphs for anything useful. He didn't have time to decode everything, but the layout suggested this was a central control hub. If he could disable the prison's automated defenses, they might have a shot at escaping. The Chrysler watched silently as Michael worked, its massive frame casting a protective shadow over him. He bypassed the first layer of security with a mix of trial and error, his military training helping him make educated guesses. Finally, the console emitted a low chime, and the overhead lights flickered. "There," Michael said, stepping back. "That should disable the energy fields on the upper levels. Now we just need to." An alarm blared, cutting him off. The console's display flashed red, and Michael cursed under his breath. The Zirith had detected the breach. "We're out of time," he said, turning to the Chrysler. "Let's move." The creature growled in agreement, and together they bolted for the nearest exit. The alarms grew louder, echoing through the corridors as they ran. Michael could hear the distant sound of boots pounding against the floor, Zirith reinforcements closing in. They reached a stairwell leading upward, and Michael took the steps two at a time, his legs burning with the effort. The Chrysler followed effortlessly, its massive body moving with surprising agility. As they climbed, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. At the top of the stairwell, they burst into a wide hall lined with cells. Other prisoners, a mix of alien species, watched with wide eyes as Michael and the Chrysler stormed past. Some shouted, others banged on their cell doors, but Michael couldn't stop. "Not now," he muttered, his focus on the far end of the hall. A large door loomed ahead, marked with alien glyphs. If his guess was right, it led to the transport bays. Michael skidded to a halt in front of the door, scanning for a control panel. The Chrysler stood beside him, its claws flexing as it turned to face the approaching reinforcements. "Hold them off," Michael said, frantically working to override the door's lock. The Chrysler growled and charged, meeting the Zirith guards head-on. The sounds of battle filled the air, shouts, plasma fire, the screech of claws against armor. Finally, the door hissed open, revealing a hangar filled with sleek, alien ships. Michael turned back, his heart pounding. "Come on." The Chrysler roared, its tail sweeping a guard into the wall before it bolted toward the hangar. Together, they sprinted for the nearest ship, alarms blaring and lights flashing around them. Michael climbed into the cockpit, the Chrysler squeezing into the cargo hold as the ship systems came online. He grabbed the controls, his hands flying over the unfamiliar interface. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off, blasting through the hangar doors and into the open sky. As the prison complex faded into the distance, Michael leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply. He glanced back at the Chrysler, its glowing eyes watching him from the shadows. "Not bad for a team effort," he said with a faint smirk. The Chrysler rumbled softly, its body finally relaxing. For the first time since his capture, Michael felt a flicker of hope. They weren't just escaping, they were surviving. Together. The sleek alien ship shot through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as it left the confines of the prison planet behind. Alarms blared within the cockpit, flashing glyphs warning of pursuit. Michael tightened his grip on the controls, guiding the unfamiliar vessel with instinct and precision. Behind him, the Chrysler shifted in the cargo hold, its massive frame barely fitting in the confined space. Hold tight, big guy, Michael muttered, his eyes scanning the monitors. This is going to get rough. The Zereth weren't about to let them escape without a fight. Two sleek fighters emerged from the clouds, their weapons glowing ominously as they closed in. The ship's systems blared another alarm, and a quick glance told Michael what he needed to know. The vessel's shields were minimal, its weapons rudimentary. It wasn't a combat ship, it was a transport, and they were at a severe disadvantage. Of course it's a glorified cargo hauler, Michael grumbled, pushing the throttle to its limit. The ship surged forward, the engines straining. We're going to need more than speed to get out of this. The Chrysler growled from the cargo hold, the sound resonating through the small ship. Michael glanced back, catching the creature's glowing eyes. I know. They've got the firepower, but we've got brains, and claws. He banked hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a burst of plasma fire from the pursuing fighters. The ship rattled under the strain, but Michael kept it steady, weaving through the dense cloud cover to obscure their path. The Chrysler rumbled again, its claws scraping against the hold's floor. Michael's gaze darted to the console, searching for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a readout for the ship's cargo system, rudimentary, but functional. A grin tugged at his lips. All right, let's see how much you like surprises. He activated the cargo release mechanism, opening a rear hatch. Crates and debris tumbled out, spinning wildly toward the pursuing fighters. The first ship dodged the makeshift barrage, but the second wasn't as lucky. A heavy crate struck its wing, sending it spiraling out of control before erupting in a fiery explosion. One down, Michael muttered, banking the ship sharply as the remaining fighter adjusted its course. The Chrysler let out a low guttural growl, its wings shifting slightly despite the cramped space. Michael could feel the tension in the air. The creature was ready to fight, even in its limited capacity. He needed to give it the opportunity. I've got an idea, he said, punching a few commands into the console. The rear hold began to depressurize slightly, the emergency lights flashing in warning. You're up. The Chrysler moved toward the hatch, its massive frame crouching low as the door slid open. Wind roared through the cabin, but the creature remained steady, its claws gripping the edges of the hold. Michael tilted the ship, angling the Chrysler directly toward the remaining fighter. With a powerful leap, the Chrysler launched itself into the air, its wings snapping open as it soared toward the enemy ship. Michael watched in awe as the beast maneuvered with precision, its glowing eyes locked on its target. The fighter pilot barely had time to react before the Chrysler's talons tore through the cockpit, ripping the vessel apart in a burst of fire and debris. The Chrysler twisted in the air, using its massive wings to stabilize itself before returning to the ship. Michael activated the emergency re-entry system, the hold's hatch sealing shut as the Chrysler landed with a thud. Its glowing eyes met Michael's, a low rumble of satisfaction escaping its throat. Not bad, Michael said, his voice tinged with both relief and admiration. Not bad at all. With the immediate threat eliminated, Michael turned his attention to navigation. The prison planet was fading in the distance, but they couldn't stay in Zereth-controlled space for long. He scanned the star charts, searching for the nearest unregulated system. Hang tight, he said to the Chrysler. We're not in the clear yet, but we've got a shot. The creature rumbled softly, settling into the cargo hold. Its massive body filled the space, but its presence was no longer as intimidating as it had been in the cell. There was something in its posture now, trust, or perhaps mutual respect. They had both survived because of each other, and that bond couldn't be ignored. As the ship entered hyperspace, Michael leaned back in the pilot's seat, his muscles finally relaxing. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a soothing contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. He glanced over his shoulder at the Chrysler, its golden eyes half closed as it rested. Well, Michael said, a small smile tugging at his lips, I didn't expect to make a new friend in the galaxy's worst prison. But here we are. The Chrysler huffed softly, its tail flicking against the hold's floor. Michael's smile faded slightly as he turned his gaze back to the stars. The Zereth would come for them again. They always did. But this time, he wasn't alone. With the Chrysler at his side, he felt a spark of defiance that had been absent for years. Wherever they come from, Michael muttered, his voice low and resolute, we'll be ready. The ship hurtled through the void, leaving the shattered remnants of the prison and its hunters behind. Together, they would face whatever the galaxy threw at them next.